different types of resilience. So in terms of the studies that we do where we're looking at brain changes and we're looking at psychopathology, you find the interesting situation that you have psychiatrically resilient individuals who have no DSM diagnosis, they're not even close, but they have the same brain changes. You know, they have the reduced hippocampus, they have the hyperamygdala response. So those individuals I think about in terms of compensations, that there's something else occurring with them that enable them to function okay with some other brain changes. So there's a really, really resilient to have no neurobiological change and no psychiatric change. There's individuals who are compensated, and then there's individuals who have everything bad going on. So that's one take. The other thing, which I haven't published yet, and it's the kind of thing that I want to replicate before publishing just to make sure, was I was intrigued about the stress inoculation hypothesis, and I thought the stress inoculation hypothesis was just a bunch of bullshit. And I just couldn't imagine it because it just didn't ever seem to me like that would make any clinical sense. But I thought, okay, we'll test it. And we looked at our data, and we looked at amount of stress that an individual adversity they experienced during the first 3 years of life. And then we particularly looked at how that then predicted how they responded to adversity during the teenage years, and we controlled for what they had in between. And it turned out that it was incredibly dramatic, that having not a lot of exposure years 1 to 3, having a little bit of exposure 1 through 3, as opposed to no exposure 1, 2, 3, made all the difference in the world. Whereas those who had a little bit of exposure, tolerable levels of stress at 1 to 3, didn't show any effective exposure during the teenage years to adversity. So there may be some things going on that are quite complicated, but that will need to be replicated.
And much more tomorrow, where we have the world's expert here to talk about it. So, Ann Maston. One last question, and then I'll let you go.
So I'm not familiar with the literature on group therapies or associated studies, but from your clinical practices, do you hypothesize that these group-based therapies, mindfulness, exercise, would be just as effective in these kids, especially because when I think of something like TFCBT, I think of the trust that the child develops with their therapist, with their social worker. So with that kind of being absent, not absent, but maybe diminished in a group context, do you guys think that it will be as effective in a group context than a one-on-one context?
I'm very biased towards individual treatment because of the reasons that you mentioned, but also because I think context is important, and sometimes it's not the type of trauma that you went through, but what about it you responded to. So what are the cues? What are your triggers? So similar two kids that went through the same violence in the community, one may be responding to sirens, and the other one may be responding to that yellow caution tape. Right? And they get similar symptoms, but they have different cues. If you don't have individual treatment for each of those, you cannot get to that level of detail. However, there are components that can be done in group. So not in CCT where you do everything individual, but I could see how the educational piece, for example, may be something that you might want to do at a group level. And in terms of the other things, when you're doing prevention, I think that's also educational in a way. So then there, I also favor the groups, and of course there's economics involved with this as well. So you need to target, if you were gonna do individual treatment in every single person, that would be really expensive, but I think for some cases it's definitely needed.
Great, thank you so much. So, as great as today was, tomorrow is going to at least top this a little bit, maybe even a lot. So thank you all for coming and sticking around with us. We start at 8:30 tomorrow, right, Sandy? Right? So everybody come, and if you need your parking validated, take it to the front desk. They'll validate your parking if you parked over there. And I thank you all for coming. Thank you so much.
Jen, how could they possibly top this?